Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me as I take you on a journey of how the Coalition created an inclusive design culture at our studio. First of all, just a quick introduction to me. I'm Zoe Curnow and a principal producer at the Coalition. I was the lead campaign producer on Gears of War 4 and 5. And you're probably wondering why I chose a photo of myself looking pretty tired with a cat sleeping on me. She's also incidentally sleeping on top of a heating pad. Very opportunistic cat. Well, I thought, like with any journey, it usually starts with a personal journey. So I wanted to share a bit of my own with you. In this photo, I'm in the depths of pain and I'm suffering with a second bout of frozen shoulder. In 2013, I injured my shoulder, and over a few months, it's turned into frozen shoulder, an incredibly painful, although temporary condition. Frozen shoulder is also known as adhesive capsulitis. And in this situation, your shoulder becomes so swollen, it expands beyond the capacity of the space inside your shoulder joint, becoming completely stuck and eventually creating scar tissue that prevents your shoulder from moving at all. It also causes pain that is like nothing I had even imagined. Now, I don't have children, but my doctor told me many women describe the pain as worse than childbirth. And I'll just have to take her word for it, but I certainly believe it from what I went through. During this time, I lost the ability to do regular day-to-day things that I had taken completely for granted, like washing my hair, driving, reading a book, and especially playing games, either with a controller or a mouse and keyboard. So it started me on my own journey of looking for ways to overcome these problems, such as getting a Kindle so that I could read without the weight of the book causing me pain, playing games on my laptop that only required use of a trackpad with one hand. And it also started me thinking about how many things like these things we use day to day that aren't formally classified anymore as accessibility features, such as being able to make the text larger on a Kindle because I couldn't necessarily hold it close enough, to my face, or just a remote control so that I didn't have to get up off the couch and change the channels. But we've normalized these features in our regular day-to-day lives, and we don't refer to them as accessibility features anymore. And that I started thinking about how we need to start thinking about accessibility in the same way as we create the games that we make. Incidentally, in 2017, my frozen shoulder came back. That's when this photo is from, but in the other shoulder. And so I went through the same cycle of seeking out ways that would help me adapt to my situation. Well, now that I've told you a little bit about me, I need to tell you just a brief history about our studio, in case you aren't familiar with us and know what we do and the types of games that we make. Our studio is a part of the Xbox family of studios inside Microsoft, and up until 2014, we were known as Black Tusk. Microsoft acquired the Gears of War intellectual property in 2014, and we then became known as the Coalition. The first game we shipped as a studio was Gears of War Ultimate Edition, which was a fully upgraded re-release of the original Gears of War from 2006 for Xbox One. We then fully took on reimagining Gears of War and the franchise, which was previously produced by Epic Games, and we put our own stamp on it with Gears of War 4. I would say at this stage we were very lightly dipping our toe into the accessibility pool. There are a few features that Gears had previously, such as playing a split screen co-op. You can have two players, each pick a different difficulty. We had, they had gore controls, so you could turn on or off gore depending on violence, and we also had obscenity filters and things like that. One of the new features we introduced in Gears of War 4 was something we called face controls. And so it was a control scheme that allowed players to not have to use the triggers on the bottom of the controller. A lot of our awareness at that time of a need for features like this came from members of the military in our community, with which our game is very popular. So at Xbox, we have two full-time accessibility program managers, but they are not dedicated to specific studios or titles, and they are a resource for us, and they assist us with compliance issues as well as being a wealth of knowledge. And they were invaluable to us, absolutely, on shipping both of our games. But in the end, accessibility really is the responsibility of each individual studio and then each team within those Xbox studios. So when did our real inclusive design culture journey begin? And I would say it was during pre-production on Gears 5. It became more of a topic of conversation in our studio, but just exactly how to move forward and what we needed to do was I think, still a little bit fuzzy. When I started to think about this journey and how it played out, this idea around how teams come together and how they figure out how to work together was a pretty great analogy for our own journey. On this slide, we have the 4 stages of team growth as established by organizational psychologist Bruce Tuckman in 1965. And they are forming, storming, norming, and performing, which is a nice little pithy rhyme that helps you not forget it. So in the forming stage is when you're beginning to understand the problem that the team has come together to tackle. And you're starting to figure out, okay, there's a goal here. We think we're all going in the same direction. Let's figure this out. And storming is when you'll see the most conflict. You're overcoming challenges and barriers. You know what the goal is you need to achieve, but you're not quite sure how to get there. And there's usually quite a bit of discussion, let's say, and kind of just figuring things out and how to work together. And then in norming, this is when you're really stabilizing as a team. And for us, what I like to talk about is this is when we were normalizing our conversations about accessibility. And then as a team, this is really when you're recognize that you have a shared responsibility to push the thing forward that you're focusing on. And then performing is a really exciting time. And that's when you're able to push for innovation and really break new ground because you've figured out how to work together. You're all aligned on the same goal and you're all pushing forward in the same direction. So this description of kind of how teams form really matches well to our accessibility journey and making inclusive design a part of our studio DNA. So as we started our forming stage ourselves, we focused on understanding the problem. And we did this by participating in an inclusive design sprint and focusing on creating empathy for players who experience a mismatch between their abilities and our games. We had our first inclusive design sprint in 2017. So over a 2-day period, we invited a team, a group of people from our team and within our studio who represented a wide range of disciplines and levels of seniority to come together to learn about inclusive design. We had about 25 people in our first inclusive design sprint, and our facilitator for our sprint was Chris Willery. Now, Chris no longer works at Microsoft, but our user research team and Will Saboon has taken these sprints on. So they're still an offering available to teams inside Xbox, and I'd say they're absolutely invaluable to really kicking off that knowledge and understanding and creating empathy around accessibility design. During the 2-day period, we learned about the mismatches that exist between the games we make and the players who play or want to play our games but cannot. We then got together in groups to brainstorm solutions, and then we shared with each other the things we learned and the results of our brainstorms. We ended up with artifacts of our design ideas that we could then use after the sprint to turn into features to be pitched to the team. As a part of the 2-day sprint, we spent time meeting with players who had different and varying needs to be able to play our games, and we asked them a lot of questions. We were encouraged to not only ask about games, but how they navigated everyday life and technology and what mismatches they were experiencing. This was the single most important part of the 2-day sprint, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Hearing directly from those with the experiences we were being asked to solve for created a desire in all of us to do better. It created strong empathy for our players as we heard such personal stories from them. We learned about why they played games, the joy it brought them, and heard stories of how new disabilities for some of them had caused them to lose the things that they used to be able to enjoy so easily. We heard about how frustrating it was to not be able to engage in those things anymore. And we had many aha moments during these sessions as we saw how easily we could adapt things inside our game to answer some of these needs that we just had never considered. Not because of a lack of caring or wanting to change these things, but truly a lack of knowledge. We regularly as a team discuss what the player will want, but we realized we weren't considering all players. So if you know about the design company IDEO, I wanted to take a minute to just read a quote to you from one of their research papers, which is called Empathy on the Edge. And IDEO likes to focus a lot on talking about empathy in design and how important that is. So remarkable things can happen when empathy for others play a key role in problem solving. In today's global marketplace, companies are being asked to design for increasingly diverse users, cultures, and environments. These design challenges can be so systemic and wickedly complex. The task of aligning all of a project's stakeholders can seem impossible, but it's not. Design empathy is an approach that draws upon people's real-world experiences to address modern challenges. When companies allow a deep emotional understanding of people's needs to inspire them and transform their work, their teams, and even their organization at large, they unlock the creative capacity for innovation. And so much for us, that is what the Inclusive Design Sprint created and allowed us to move forward and grow with our knowledge and understanding and really progress to the next stage. After we met with the players, we got back together in our smaller groups and brainstormed possible design solutions to the problems the players were experiencing. On this slide are some of the features that directly came out of our Inclusive Design Sprint, such as subtitles with context, Jackbot as playable character, target assist, and being able to toggle camera shake on and off. One of our biggest aha moments during this process was realizing that it is really important to include speaker name, context for the player, intent or tone in subtitles, and that these things already existed in our scripts. We were actually taking them out when we generated our subtitles and ingested the scripts into our game. So as you embark on your own journey, you're going to have a lot of those moments. Some of them sometimes will be harder than others. Many of you will know Cherry Ray is an accessibility advocate and expert in games. They were a participant in our Inclusive Design Sprint, and I've also known Cherry personally for about 10 years. At the end of the sprint, we gifted Cherry a copy of Gears 4, and they weren't able to play it. The very franchise that they began their consulting career with, they could not play. It's hard to not feel like you have failed when you go through this type of discovery, but we rallied as a team and made sure that a toggle for camera shake made it into Gears 5. We were opening that door to inclusive design thinking and embracing the idea of empathy at the core of this basis. Inclusive Design Sprint complete, empathy created, a bunch of brainstormed ideas ready to be pitched. We're done, right? Well, not quite. So getting those features into the game is the goal, and that takes a lot more than just education and advocacy. I think during this time, the thing we heard the most was, but how many players will use insert accessibility feature here? And knowing how to overcome these types of challenges and barriers is really key to your success. How many of you have heard that argument when proposing accessibility features? I'm really curious what types of things you've heard and how you overcame them. And I'd love it if you posted those in the chat with other people that are watching this talk. And we can hear from each other, just kind of the things that we're experiencing. Because this talk is pre-recorded, I'm watching the chat as well, so I'll chime in and feel free to ask me questions too if you'd like to. I'm going to pause with a little bit of silence here to give you time to have a little bit of a chat, and then I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, we're going to move on to the next slide now. So for us, our key challenges were socializing the idea that accessibility features and considerations are not niche features that only a fraction of our players use, and ensuring that our leadership team was also behind these initiatives. So the biggest thing that we were all able to really pretty easily align around was focusing on the solve for one, solve for many analogy. By relating features that might have been considered accessibility only features to a wider context and framing their benefits on a more global scale, we were able to show them as just more ways players can customize their own experience, which was something everyone in games is already familiar with. By expanding on the benefits to our players, we could talk in terms of making our game more welcoming to a wider range of players. The other aspect of integrating our accessibility features into our game development process is that they weren't labeled as such when we did our planning or creation of our game development backlog. The feature would be given a name just like any other feature. So for example, our subtitles we called rich subtitles, and that was the feature name. It wasn't called subtitles for accessibility or something like that. This did mean they were prioritized along with every other feature, which did lead to some contentious prioritizing conversations, but that's a normal part and expected part of game development. Our goal with this method was to normalize conversations around accessibility features so that it became an expectation that every game feature would have accessibility considered at the same level as everything else that we considered essential and everything that goes into creating a whole feature in a game. Probably the most important thing we had in our studio is that our leadership got on board with accessibility as a priority early on. Rod Ferguson, our former studio head, attended the last day of our inclusive design sprint. Matt Searcy and Ryan Cleven, our campaign and multiplayer design directors, also participated in the entire design sprint. And Otto Ottosson, our multiplayer lead producer, was also the accessibility lead for our studio. By engaging this many leaders this early in development, we were able to weave the idea of inclusive design into our leadership culture, and it meant we had advocates at the highest level in our studio. We were very lucky. We also had myself, our tech director Mike Rayner, and our audio director John Morgan on board from the beginning as well, and they also participated in our inclusive design sprint. I know our experience isn't typical, so I wanted to make sure I recognize that and recognize that some of you may have much more challenging struggles than we did with getting leadership on board. But I also want to emphasize why I think we were so successful with many of our accessibility initiatives on Gears 5 is that we had the support and momentum of our studio and project leadership. But if you want to sustain that momentum, it can't just be a few, and it can't just be a few people in leadership positions. You really need buy-in from a much larger group. So that actually brings me to this next slide. So I've talked about kicking off our accessibility journey by participating in Inclusive Design Sprint, getting the creative juices flowing with a small subset of our team through brainstorming, getting buy-in from leadership, and integrating accessibility design into our normal day-to-day planning inside game development. But the problem with relying on just a few leaders to keep pushing this forward, even if you have created what you think is a solid foundation, is your team probably doesn't feel completely invested in that culture shift, and it could leave the studio when those leaders might leave. And that's precisely what actually happened at our studio, in that we had some key leaders leave. So Otto, our accessibility lead, multiplayer producer, left in December of 2019, followed by Rod, our studio head, in February, and then Ryan, our multiplayer design director, in the spring. So we knew we had a few things we had to do to keep that momentum going that we had on Gears 5. Just going backwards wasn't an option for us, and we were very proud of what we achieved on that game. So we needed a new accessibility champion who could breathe some new life into our thinking around accessibility. We needed to create an avenue in the studio for more of our team to get officially involved in accessibility initiatives, brainstorming and problem solving for current and new feature development. They were there. We just hadn't created a system or communication channel for them to see how they could get involved. And to be honest, that wasn't entirely fair to people in our studio that were really passionate about this as well. So as well, something that Otto and I had talked about a lot on Gears 5 was that we firmly believed that we needed a game designer more closely involved in accessibility leadership and ownership in the studio, and that we needed a team of people supporting that person so the responsibility wasn't just laid at one person's feet. So earlier this year, we had Katie Scott join us as a senior designer, and she is our new accessibility champion in our studio. So in this moment, I wanted to actually share a couple of quotes from our team members and how they see accessibility and more inclusive design as game developers and what's important to them. And this first quote is from Rob Guick, who is one of our QA project managers at the studio and was a QA lead on Gears 5. Accessibility to me has always been about going beyond compliance. In the last 6 years, we've seen our studio grow and mature from meeting our internal razors to helping expand industry standards, and we're still not satisfied. I always have a voice in my head that says, that was great. Can we do it even better? Which drives me to question and evolve my own modalities on a regular basis. Our next quote is from our audio director, John Morgan. After Gears of War 4 was released, not only as developers, but as fans of the franchise, we became more aware that we had to do more to be more accessible and inclusive. With Gears 5, we took a ground-up approach and worked on accessibility features as we would any gameplay feature, from design to implementation. And as a result, when combined together, all of these things helped to make Gears 5 more accessible. So earlier this year, we were able to finally kick off our first accessibility strike team. We sent a call out to the studio asking for folks who are passionate about inclusive design to send us an email, just letting us know if they're interested. In the end, we ended up with 12 people who've been helping us develop what the purpose of the strike team is and prioritize what we need to tackle next. One of the most valuable things we worked on is aligning on what our strike team is responsible for and what we do and what we don't do inside the studio. Because the goal of the strike team is not to take the consideration of accessibility off of specific teams developing features, but to be a resource they can come to if they have questions or need experts brought in. We can be a conduit to the larger Xbox accessibility community, the accessibility consulting community, as well as other studios within Xbox also working on accessibility features. Members of the strike team have also become advocates inside the studio that are asking the really hard questions of the teams creating features that they are also a part of. They are the ones throughout the studio reminding everyone that inclusive design as an expectation, not an afterthought, and sharing their knowledge with others within the studio. Right now in your studio, no matter how large or small, there are going to be folks who are passionate about this. They just perhaps aren't quite sure yet how to engage or how to push accessibility forward if you haven't created kind of some formal structures for them to get involved. If you provide them with the opportunity to engage, you're going to be really surprised by how many passionate and excited game developers are going to be knocking down your door to help and get involved. So the next stage that we talked about earlier in that team formation is what we call the performing stage. And this is when the team is firing on all cylinders and just generally really kicking butt. So I don't think we're quite there yet at the Coalition in our accessibility journey. I know we were very successful in Gears 5 and a lot of things that we did, but as you saw the quote earlier, we're not quite satisfied yet with where we're at, and certainly the community keeps letting us know where we haven't quite hit it out of the park. So with our newly formed strike team and the ambition of putting many more folks in our studio through inclusive design sprints and more education, I'm feeling really positive we're moving into that stage where we're going to be able to innovate more rather than just fixing problems and being reactive to what already exists inside the game. So now, almost at the end of our time together today, I wanted to recap our stages of growth as we embarked on our inclusive design journey. So we formed as a team knowing that accessibility was something we wanted to explore. We formed around a common goal of curiosity and learning and tried to further understand the problem we wanted to solve. As we acquired more knowledge, empathy, and understanding for our players, we adopted a mindset of inclusive design. Along with this knowledge, we became more ambitious of what we wanted to achieve, and this naturally created some conflict and questioning as we tried to change the status quo, and we headed into the storming stage. Our leadership that aligned on our accessibility inclusive design goals, and we integrated these conversations into our normal day-to-day of feature development. We made conversations around accessibility inclusion the norm and not the exception. And now with our newly formed accessibility strike team and some ambitious new goals of how to go further in our journey, we are really hoping to break new ground and hit our stride as we get into that performing stage. Of all these stages, I would say forming or just starting was the easy part. It's the storming that can take you by surprise and will present you with some of the biggest challenges you have to overcome. The key is to not give up at this stage. It's understandable to feel that it might be an impossible task, but if you find your champions, then you won't have to go it alone, and you'll have a whole group of people all driving towards the same goal. So in closing, I wanted to acknowledge those in the community that have been fighting this fight for such a long time. It's an exhausting challenge, and I wanted to recognize the work that you've done and continue to do. You hold us all accountable, and for that, I just really wanted to thank you. So this is my final slide. So our time has come to an end together, and it means the day has come to an end as well. If you want to reach out on Twitter, please do. I'll admit I am not great at consistently checking it and responding, but I will try to be better at it. As well, please do reach out to Katie, our new accessibility champion, if you have feedback, comments, suggestions on Gears 5 and how we could have done better with our accessibility features and what you'd like to see us consider in the future. We'd love to hear from you, and really thank you so much for spending this time with me and listening, and I look forward to chatting with you afterwards as well.